Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi class, welcome to the second part of my measurement class. Today we're going to talk about the data book and what you may call your notebook. And really this is the part of the lecture in which I like to encourage you to make sure that you have a really properly written, recorded data book. And this will help you a lot in the writing process. So what contains in a data book or in your notebook should be all the data that you have already recorded, all the observations that you have done, the little experiments, the little or even the big references that you have found, all being recorded accordingly in your notebook or in the data book. And because this will lead to helping you in writing your papers, your journals, and your thesis. So that's why this is an essential part of the measurement, which is the data book. And when I talk about writing, I believe in the power of writing, and I don't want your thesis to be just a thesis. Let it be one of your best authorships. And so when you think of it like that, you actually elevate your writing process to another level, to a higher level when you think about authorship. And most of the time, you have done reports before, but this is probably one of the most important authorship that you have ever done. And you want to make sure that it's done appropriately and you do a very good job on it. So you want to have a beautifully and powerfully written thesis. Now before you get to that, the end product, the process involves the recording of all your observations and your data. And because when things are recorded accordingly and appropriately, it actually helps in the writing process. And having a good data book, and I cannot emphasize this enough, okay, there's having a good data book. What I meant by good, that means you dedicatedly jot down all your recordings, all your observations in your data book, and all the references, all the findings, your conversations with your supervisors, all being recorded in your notebook. So to me, that's a good notebook because that will actually help in your writing process. The little drawings and everything that matters in your research, all are being recorded in your data book. And when you have something which is really comprehensive, that will actually guide you in the writing process. And when you have something which is complete to actually help you in the writing process, no doubt that will lead you to a very, very good thesis, or in this case, authorship. So if you think that, why do I have to spend time on, having a good data book, I just jot down my data and that's it. So I don't have to do everything meticulously, it's just a notebook. So I hope after this lecture, you're inspired to actually do a good job on your notebook. Alright, because this is part of your measurement. You have your tools to actually measure, but where do you actually record it? Alright, so I'm going to show you some famous notebooks so that you'll be inspired. Alright, and yeah, that's the whole point of this short lecture. So Charles Darwin's, well, we all know Darwin's, this theory of evolution. Before he even, before we even know about this theory of evolution, it all started from this Darwin, his notebooks. Um, well, at, at least for this particular notebook, which actually showed his first sketch of an evolutionary tree with the words "I think" at the top. So here is his notebook. This is, his idea on what evolution is and so on. And so he used it to explore the evolution of life and describing, each of these branches, the relationships between organisms. And so he wrote everything, all the little notes and all that, all his thoughts. And finally at the top, I think. And I find this to be, and the rest, as they say, the rest is history. So we know this we've heard of this famous theory of evolution, but the whole point is not on his theory of evolution. The whole point of mentioning this is that he actually jotted his ideas in a notebook and then start processing on his ideas. So you see, having something, written in your notebook actually sort of like, it's like a cement to something that you want to start, working on. And most of the time, like if you don't write it down, you tend to forget on the idea, one good idea, many good ideas, and so on. However insignificant your ideas might be, please do not underestimate your thoughts. Please write everything down in your notebook, because that could actually, when you look back, as you start writing, those little writings could actually lead to bigger thoughts and bigger progress towards your experiment. So why is keeping careful notes of your work important? Now, one of the things that may be relevant, is certainly relevant, is that so that you or anyone can reproduce your experiments. Now, I put you here because, there is no way that you can actually reproduce your experiments without first jotting down your methods, your methods accordingly in a notebook. You can't memorize everything, all the details, the gory details. So if you actually put down, the steps, you can actually reproduce the experiment again if you have to. And if this is supposed to be passed to your juniors or anyone who wants to actually work with you, and so this is something that in the future, of course, so anyone can actually reproduce your experiments by looking at your notes, which has been written well. Now, the second thing is to keep track of the data produced. Okay, so you have your data produced as you do your experiment. And so how else can you actually keep track of the data, the progress of your data, without you actually jotting it down in your notebook? How can you improve things when you don't have any point of reference written somewhere? Okay, now the third seems to be a little bit, why is it there? But I'll share with you something in a little bit, alright? To prove that you actually did the work. Now, of course, everyone can see that you go to the lab and doing the work, but there must be something in black and white that really proves that you have done the work, you've done the experiment. It is you who actually laboriously working in the lab and dedicatedly doing the work. So that has to be proven in black and white. And one of the ways to actually do that is actually to have a notebook, right? So this leads to the fourth point, so that you can prove that your idea was yours. Now, in some cases, some of the initiative may come from your idea. It's, the big picture may be suggested by your supervisor, but the little details may be yours. So this is one way that you can also actually prove that this is your idea, and so on, not your lab mates, not anyone. So this is something that uh, worth writing in your notebook. Now this leads to what I would like to share on claiming in black and white that you are the you actually do the work. So this is an unfortunate event of Albert Schatz with his supervisor Salman, a Waxman. So they were working in Rutgers University in New York, I think. And so Albert Schatz he actually is a soil biologist. So he was working on this soil, and he found that this in the soil that there is actually an antibiotic that can actually cure tuberculosis, and it's called streptomycin. So because of his previous knowledge, his previous studies on soil, so he has this additional knowledge to actually figure out after his further studies. So he found out, there is actually an antibiotic to actually cure tuberculosis. So he was excited, so he showed it to his supervisor, and his supervisor was excited. So, and then what happens is that they decided to patent, but it was soon found that the patent was not Albert Schatz wasn't in the patents, his name wasn't there when he found out. So he actually talked to his supervisor, why isn't my name in the patent? And so they decided to actually solve this, outside the court. And so, and you thought that, everything is resolved, until what happens is that the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1952 claimed that the Nobel Prize in Physiology was awarded to Salman A. Waxman for his discovery of streptomycin, the first antibiotic effective against tuberculosis. So now if you think about it, it was actually Albert Schatz who actually discovered the streptomycin, and of course, it's a collaboration. By right, he should be sharing the Nobel Prize too. But but Waxman took advantage of the situation and actually outcast Schatz, and so he was actually left, without the Nobel Prize. So really, it was really sad. And so what happens is that how this was actually discovered was maybe a few years after someone in Britain was in the midst of writing a book on antibiotics, and one of the things that he learned was on the streptomycin, and he knew that he had to go to the States, to Rutgers, to actually find out. And when he was in Rutgers, so people were saying, were mentioning Albert Schutz on this on his discovery. And so when the author approached Albert Schutz, so he showed that this is his notebook where he actually jot down his data on his finding. And then everyone believed that he was actually the part of this, an instrumental part of this discovery. So so they decided to actually give him, so he was of course very sad, so they decided to award him with the university's highest honor. But if you think about it, the Rutgers medal versus the Nobel Prize, okay, so clearly having a notebook is very important to actually prove that you actually did the work. And so this is one instance in which you don't want to be caught in. All right, so yes, the importance of notebook, I cannot emphasize enough. So now, well, this is algebra, all right, and we all learn algebra thanks to Isaac Newton, and this is something that he wrote many years ago. And this was actually this can be found at the University of Cambridge Digital Library. So this was written long ago, and this is so significant, this is so precious and kept. If notebooks are not important, why does University of Cambridge bother to even do a digitalize this notebook so that it is forever preserved? Okay, it's because of this importance of ideas, of truth, of discovery that 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 one actually writes. Okay, so the importance of actually writing something, put it down, put all your ideas down, because you never know that it may become one of the biggest references ever. So like this one. Well, this is another famous notebook, and guess who this is from? Alright, you probably know Leonardo da Vinci. He is all of us. Why do I say that he is all of us? He's a painter, a mathematician, a scientist, a philosopher. So he's all that. He's a polymath who is everything. A polymath, as in the first lecture, in which he is very he's equipped in so many different knowledges. And because of his meticulous recording of his drawing, the measurements, the details of his technical drawing, it is possible for us to actually enjoy this Leonardo da Vinci kits, which you can get online, to actually play with the technical this machine that Leonardo da Vinci drew, which he may not even actually put it into reality. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but it's some of it are actually drawings, and some of it may have been put into reality, into a real machine. But the thing that I want to emphasize here, that when I talk about that people can actually replicate what you have done, this is what I meant. Okay, if you do a very good detailed drawing, your ideas can be replicated into the actual thing. And so you can actually see how well the machine actually works. Alright, now this is Richard Feynman, who happens to be my favorite scientist. And and this is his notebook, not when he was a professor, but this is his notebook when he was a teenager. Everyone knows that he's a child prodigy. He's smart from the very beginning. He's so always curious, and he's always ahead of his time. So he's curious about mathematics, and so the Euler's identity. So this is his notes that he wrote during his teenage life. And guess what? It's nicely written, nicely preserved, and now it's actually part of a and this is history, and this is something which Caltech actually keeps to commemorate this the brilliant Richard Feynman. And especially if you're a physics major, I highly recommend that you get the Feynman lectures on physics. And I think there are 3 book series, and he actually explained physics in such a beautiful, simplest, it's not, it's just simply beautiful. And I actually highly recommend that. If you're a physics major, to actually find out about this. Not so sure whether it's in the library. I think so. You can check out, but it's really nice. I may be a chemistry major, but I love reading on physics, so this is really amazing. So aside from that, he's also a lot of things, and so these are really interesting books on Richard Feynman that for sure is in the library. So surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman, and 6 Pieces, Essential Physics. So these 2 books are brilliant, and I highly recommend. So he's bongo player, he's a magician, he's also a physicist, he's also the guy who resolved why the Challenger shuttle blasts off. So that's the unfortunate event. So he was the one who discovered why it actually exploded. And then there's Marie Curie. Yes, you know that Marie Curie worked on radioactive elements, and so a good scientist will always record on what he or she discovered. So this is actually Marie Curie's notebook, all written, and if I'm not mistaken, this is actually in a library in United Kingdom. I may be wrong, in London. I may be wrong, but it's in a library somewhere. But here's the cool part. Until today, this book is still radioactive. So it's probably like the half-life of this is if I'm not mistaken about 1000 over years. So it's really radioactive, showing the dedication that she actually put into this, which actually took her life as well, but a proof that that this is really her blood, sweat and tears, and this notebook is still radioactive. How cool is that? Right. So, right, what we normally do, all right, and I used to be in this category. Okay, so you write your experimental design in your notebook, and then you start doing your experiment, and then you may have some results printed. Maybe you have some spectra, you have some um, whatever form of results that you have. And if those results are printed, okay, or results are actually jotted, you may have jotted it in your notebook, or it may be printed and you put them in folders. And then you have journals that you read to compare your results with that which is published, and you'll probably put that in the folder. So if this is the method that we do, so you see that it seems like, okay, there is you have this transition, but there seems to be, it's not quite connected, as in, how do you actually start writing something? So to me, this is the ideal way of dealing with your notebook, making your notebook an essential part of this measurement process, of your writing process, of your postgraduate process. Okay, tracking important information. To me, the tracking part is the most essential part. So you have this experimental design, you have your notebook, okay, so so you have this, then you have these results printed, and so you have these results printed in folders. That's fine if you actually have it printed, but if you have something printed in your folder, make sure that in your printed results there is actually some kind of labeling in the printed results and also in your notebook, so that you can actually look at these printed results and go back to your notebook on where you actually start writing on that particular experiment. Okay, so how do you actually label? Via the dates. So make sure that your notebooks are dated. Every time you write something, make sure that it's dated. Every time you print something, make sure that it's dated. And if you keep it in your computer, in your laptop, make sure you have a folder that is also dated, so that you can actually go back to your notebook and start recalling what you have done. On top of that, okay, when you do your experiment, all right, so there must be a clear writing on your observation. What did you see? How well did it go? Do you need to repeat the process? Do you need to change the parameters? If can you actually repeat the experiment? And what's next? So this part of the execution, okay, and the observation, the execution, and the observation has to go back and forth between the notebook and the execution, because only via writing your observation in your notebook, you can actually start tracking this important information and start improving things. Or if things goes well, okay, so as I said, what's next? Now, something which you may not thought of. Okay, now if you read lots of journals, you probably keep them in your laptops, in your endnotes, so that for your future reference. Some of you like it to be tangible, so you like it printed, and you may keep it in a folder. Now, anything that you read, any important points in a journal, if you find that to be important, write it down in your notebook so that you can always, anything important, if you read something again dated, I read this journal today, and so the full, and make sure that you cite that journal, okay, and this journal says this and this and this. Now imagine if you actually do all this with all this labeling, observation, and references. Imagine if this is done. Can you imagine how helpful this is going to be when you start writing your thesis, when you start writing your paper, especially your thesis, your authorship, as I said, because all this is really comprehensive, and it really helps you in actually guiding you on the information. Because when you write your thesis, what you need is information. And where do you get this information? From your notebook. Everything that you have written is there. Your notebook should be something that is you can't do without. You'll be panicking if you lost it. Okay, because it's so important. So it's something which is really priceless. And if that doesn't convince you, imagine if you don't do that. Imagine if you don't do all this, meaning that when you start your writing process, it's going to be all over. You need the information to write your thesis, but where are the information? Okay, you write something which may not be written in detail in your notebook. You find your notebook, it's just where you actually put your data without any explanation, without any analysis, no references, no detailed observation, and then you get lost because you don't have enough information to actually write something. And if you are aiming to actually write a fantastic thesis, that is not going to happen if this doesn't take place. So everyone, so class, this is why I'm doing this. This is why this is part of my measurement class. The data book is so important. Okay. Unfortunately, because of this MCO, this movement control order, I couldn't go back to my office to actually show you my notebook, which I had during my PhD days, and I usually showed that during this measurement class to actually prove a point how this communication. So I have this notebook and I have these printed folders. So the example that I actually wanted to show you is that I took out something from my folder and I could trace back from this printing. So my folder is really thick. We have so many printed papers, printed spectra. It's a thick folder. So I will in the previous class, I will take out one of the printed spectra randomly, and then I say that I can trace back the details of the experiment. And how am I able to do that? Because it's dated and it's labeled. And on top of that, I also save it in my laptop, so I also put the file's name to actually explain that. So when I look at So if this says, okay, go this certain date and page 40, so I go to page 40 and see that. So yeah, I did say that you should date your notebook, put a date on everything, on your every experiment. It is also useful to actually put the page to page your notebook, so that if everything is page, so you can also refer it via page. And if you have more than one notebook during your postgraduate, so make sure that you label it notebook A, notebook B, notebook C, or notebook 1, 2, and 3. Alright, and so here can be, in notebook 2, page 40, or notebook 1, page 20. So all the information are important, and you can always keep track. And that's the beauty of doing this. So never underestimate the importance of data book. Alright? So this is a rhetoric question. So how does your notebook look like? So this is something, if you haven't done, something which I've recommended, it's worth doing it. And this is my recommendation. It really, really, it's been useful, it's been helpful, so far for me, and I hope this recommendation is something that you can take up and find it very useful, right? Okay, so right, so next class we're going to talk about challenges. All right, and the question following for this week's class, okay, I will provide it in Spectrum, and please answer that and email me, and I'll take that as part of your attendance. All right, till then, thank you. See you next week on challenges. Or before that, on this challenges, what I want you to actually keep in mind is actually to think about all the challenges that you're facing at the moment when you're doing your postgrad. Alright, so see you next week. Thank you. Assalamualaikum, and take care. Stay safe. Bye.